afternoon, ASE. Guys, it's good to have you here. Thank you very much for making the presentation. I hope that you are going to learn a lot, and we're going to share some interesting stories together. It's going to get a lot hotter in here after the presentation, because today I'm speaking about the hottest topic in the world of digital advertising, which is mobile ad fraud. Let me give you a bit of background. I've been in the digital space for well on 20 years, doing everything from hacking the TCP/IP protocol to writing code in assembly, C, Perl, Java, and so on, all the way through to copywriting, affiliate marketing, mobile content, and apps, to today, where I am knee-deep in the mobile ecosystem, being the co-founder of LeadBolt, a mobile advertising platform that works with all the great names in the mobile industry across iOS and Android, as well as brands, advertisers, and marketers across the world, where we deliver over 10 billion impressions a month in over 165 countries. It's a dynamic industry. We've seen it all, and I'm here to share some of those insights. By a show of hands, how many of you have done some online advertising? Great. All right, so I'm at the right show. By a show of hands, how many of you have done some mobile advertising? Good, good. All right, and how many of you believe the returns you're getting from mobile are incredible? Wow, I didn't expect this response. 0. That's incredible in itself, because mobile advertising has been touted as not only the wave of the future, but the here and now fastest growth sector in digital advertising. Let's have a look at the stats. Mobile advertising is expected to grow to $143 billion this year alone. That's twice that from 2 years ago. And it's expected to continue unabated to 247 billion by 2020. Who wants to get a share of that? Good. 2 of you, 3 of you. That's good, because it turns out that not only 3 of you, the good guys, want to get a share of that money, but they're also bad actors, extortionists, fraudsters, scammers, and spammers. How are they going to lay their hands on it? As this graph shows, they're turning their attention to the easiest, highest reward method. They're doing it through ad fraud. I read an interesting interview on CNBC where they estimate that ad fraud will cost brands $16.4 billion this year. That's a massive number, and it indicates how profitable it really is for those bad guys. The scary thing is, we conducted our own research on brands and agency professionals, and about 1/3 of those respondents were oblivious or even conscious of the fact that fraudulent activity has affected their advertising efforts. And you know what? You can't blame them. To gain an understanding of why fraud is happening in an industry of so many intelligent people who should know better, you only have to look at the complexity of the environment. Let's just say it's incredibly complex. In order for the entire process of media buying, from ad delivery to install and engagement, there are just too many touch points, with disparate parties working sometimes towards conflicting agendas. Now, add to that the technology challenges with the likes of fragmentation, latency, measurement, attribution, lack of system-to-system integration, and so on, and you have an environment hard to understand and highly susceptible to interference from criminals. So who's at risk? Everyone. The bad guys are really good at finding the gaps, taking advantage of them, and the impacts are very serious indeed. Many people think of ad fraud as purely a monetary issue. It's much, much more. Consider the amount of time and resource one puts into creating campaigns, monitoring and measuring, fixing, optimizing and tailoring, creating flows, funnels, paths, and so on. And they're doing this all based on pure metrics, and strangely enough, after blissfully being aware that you're actually the target of fraud, you're making big business decisions, allocation of resources and hiring, only to find out down the line that you aren't actually getting paid on the money you believe you've earned. How big an impact do you think that would have on your business? Could be darn right catastrophic. Okay, so where's this happening? Everywhere. In some places more than others though. The interesting thing about ad fraud is that it follows the dollars. Our partners at AppFlyer have provided this heat map to show how widespread mobile ad fraud is across the globe. The heat map only shows top fraud countries. The lower fraud territories like Africa, for instance, are in grey. I guess the risk-reward resource equation isn't justified due to the low payouts. Make no mistake though, it's still happening. In higher payout countries, like Germany for instance, the fraud is correspondingly higher. You can see in Australia, it's marked as a high fraud area too. Aside from payout rates, any guesses why? So Australia is actually one of the first and top test market countries where app developers launch their apps in order to gauge the response of the market. As it's the first, or it's an English-speaking country that has very similar demographics to the first world US countries that people are trying to target, the developers are taking a much smaller risk by maybe burning customers there, but not necessarily having to lose a larger customer base. Of course, they end up burning more than just money there because the bad guys know this too, and they are targeted accordingly. Now, we need to find someone to blame. So, who can we find? It would be easy to just blame the criminals. However, every part of the ecosystem has to acknowledge and take responsibility for their own areas. The app stores don't allow passing of variables through from click to install, so marketers can consistently track and attribute the true source. The operating systems, especially Android, broadcast intents and even in events across the operating system so that other apps and processes can listen in. Publishers and developers, well, let's say there are intentionally bad sources, and then there are sources that either have no idea or no desire of weeding out their bad traffic. Ad networks, SSPs, exchanges, they don't spend enough time or resource to protect their clients or try to stay a step ahead of the bad guys by developing automated systems to identify and filter out bad traffic. And then the attribution companies or solution providers, they mostly fire events and confirmation postbacks regardless of the quality of the traffic, instead of proactively managing the fraud by filtering and quarantining up front. Being the authoritative source, they need to be responsible for the accuracy of their attribution, and anti-fraud should be a mandatory part. I'm glad to see, however, that they are addressing this even as we speak. DSPs and advertisers, they don't do sufficient monitoring and measurement, and they're slow to report suspected fraud, which only delays fixing things. Accountability from everyone in the industry is needed if we're going to fight fraud. We need to work together to ensure we weed out the bad actors and ensure consistency and open sharing of data, information, and knowledge. It's surprising how much disagreement and confusion there is around defining ad fraud. One of the biggest misconceptions I see is a blanket definition of ad fraud as non-human, i.e. bot traffic. While that certainly is a characteristic or a type of fraud, it's totally ignoring fraud of the human variety. Then, we have others who overreach by wrapping everything into the definition of ad fraud, including anything related to low quality or low engagement, where in truth it may have more to do with their mobile site or app or simply their audience. Of course, if you're the one paying the money, the marketer or the advertiser, you have the luxury of defining the rules of the game. Just make sure that your partners are fully aware of your definition up front before you start the relationship. And you can avoid a lot of those unpleasant conversations down the line. So here are some of the ways fraud or quality play into the payment model. Impression or CPM, this could take the shape of hidden ads, fake sites, video ad fraud, paid traffic fraud, and retargeting fraud. Click or CPC, Fraudsters select the most expensive keywords, the ones with the highest pay per click, and they craft their own mobile sites packed full of those high-paying CPC keywords to generate search ads, and brands buy these believing it originates from a respectable source. Install CPI. Was the install from a real user? Are they actually wanting to engage? Or have they been incentivized in some way? Lead CPL. This could come from small armies of people in underdeveloped countries fraudulently filling out forms all the way through to automated tools. Injection adware. Ad injection, attribution injection, click injection. We'll cover one of those aspects a little bit in greater detail later. Let's just say some of the biggest brands and most reputable publishers in the world have been victims of this type of fraud, including Walmart, Home Depot, Macy's, Dell, and Samsung. Domain spoofing. With a simple line of code, fraudsters can make advertisers think mobile sites are really sites from reputable publishers. And CMS fake publisher. In this approach, bad guys hack into a publisher's mobile content management system and they create their own beautiful pages that look like they're actually from that publisher. And then they put these mobile pages on ad exchanges with premium publishers markup code. But the advertiser who purchases these positions gets pages with no premium content and pays the fraudster instead of the publisher. And then we've got blending and audience extension. Publishers may have insufficient inventory to deliver to the demand they've committed to, so they go out there and try and find the shortfall by buying media off other sources, either programmatically or direct, at a lower CPM and obviously at a lower quality, all the way prejudicing the advertiser. So we've mentioned a few of the attack vectors. From a high level, though, as I said, you can split them up into the non-human traffic and the human traffic. We're now going to delve a little bit deeper. Bots. In terms of bots, everything is automated and computer-driven, from the traffic to the engagements. The level of sophistication is mind-boggling. And as one delves deeper, one cannot help but be impressed by the advanced artificial intelligence designed to mimic real user behavior, which makes it exceptionally difficult to detect and stop. A classic example of this is MethBot. Anyone heard of it? Okay, well, this was a bot that was controlled by a single group based in Russia, and they operated out of data centers in the US and the Netherlands. This bot farm allegedly generated criminals $3 to $5 million in revenue per day from fraudulent impressions. So to give you an idea of the scale and manner, over 6,000 domains and 250,000 specific URLs were spoofed to trick advertisers into thinking they were buying video placements on premium publisher web and mobile sites. Fake ad impressions were then generated on these domains using over 500,000 IP addresses. And advertisers were happily paying, believing they were obtaining cheap premium traffic with good engagement. Detection was exceptionally challenging as the fraudsters used sophisticated measures to avoid standing out, including manipulation of geolocation data, countermeasures against code used by specific ad tech providers to filter out ad fraud, and exceptional bot imitation of human behavior, such as social media logins and cursor and user movements. By the time the botnet was uncovered and dismantled, it's estimated they earned over $180 million. On the human side, we've got invisible ads, also known as ad stacking. This occurs when the publisher invisibly loads ads behind the uppermost ad, effectively hiding the ones behind. Of course, the publisher still gets paid for or rewarded for the impressions generated, but the invisible ads have 0% visibility. More advanced publishers ensure that a click on the visible ad triggers or registers clicks on all ads behind.
thereby making it appear as though these invisible ads are actually getting real user engagement. Smart, right? Fraudsters do this on a massive scale, and they can even do it on CPI. If the fraudster is strategic, they stack ads that they know the user has an intent in and likely to someday download, giving them a chance of the attribution and making everything appear more legitimate to the advertiser. Domain spoofing. This is mismatched domain information and page information in a publisher's site list. It occurs when publishers pretend to be another publisher by creating an account under a domain they do not own. Advertisers purchase inventory on these publishers, believing they are purchasing premium traffic, not realizing they're in actual fact purchasing something entirely different. Click spam. Click spam occurs when clicks statistically register for the advertiser, but are not essentially a consequence of a real user's immediate click on an ad. This could take the blatantly evil form of publishers using bots to generate fake traffic IDs and corresponding clicks, to highly questionable tactics that people use to game the system by having helper processes in the background generate spurious clicks on ads in the hope of winning and gaining that install, all the way through to something called precaching. Precaching happens before a user hits an ad. And instead of tracking a user after they've clicked an ad install, it happens it happens as a consequence of the actual network getting a post back. If the person doesn't actually interact with the ad, then nothing happens. If they do interact, then the relevant network will cash in that click. As insidious as it sounds, it's actually a legitimate tactic used as an attempt to address the shortcomings of attribution. This graph shows you a quick illustration of click fraud. Now, it's very difficult to get it in a graph because you have so many different variations, and as you're trying to analyze your traffic, you will see different patterns emerge, but on aggregate, you have to actually extract them. Here you can see an example towards the end of the tail. There's a slight spike, which actually then leads on to more consistent levels of installs. And this is a result of the click spam activity intended to claim installs where they may be a result of something else like actual organic installs. Click injection. It's come about as a result in the crack of the armor of last click attribution. For mobile apps, the attribution or credit for an install is determined by the attribution companies based on who delivered the last click to the campaign before the open of the app. In theory then, to claim the install, all a bad actor has to do is fire a click as the app's opened. How can this be done? Well, luckily for them, on Android, when an app is downloaded and opened on the device, an intent broadcast allows other apps to know this. All they need to do then is to inject the campaign click to the attribution company for the new app, thereby attempting to claim the last click and becoming the attributed source of the install. Here's a good example of how it looks on the graph. If you look in the install time analysis, you'll see unreasonably short install times in seconds, where there's a ton of installs within moments of click, which is a red flag, possibly indicating a click injection at play. Now onto the farm. This is an industry within itself, and it affects the entire digital ecosystem, from advertising to social media. A click farm is where fake clicks, installs, ratings, and rankings for mobile apps and social posts are manipulated on scale and by real users, but with no true purchase or engagement intent. It's scary because it's real and very easy to set up and almost impossible to detect if done correctly. Here are some photos you can see that just shows banks of mobile phones. You can be sure that each has its own SIM, its own IP address, and so on. The apps are just waiting for someone to come in, click, view, and play. Tons of phones on desks being powered, and you can see a beautiful wall of phones which look like they're being controlled by a central computer, which can then virtually monitor and measure each of those devices, allowing real users to actually still click, install, and use those phones remotely. And then lots more phones and lots more cables. So here's a quick look inside another click farm. This video was taken by a Russian visitor to China, and he uploaded it in May this year. He's flabbergasted at the scale. He estimated that there were over 10,000 phones. So to give you a flavor of what's happening in the wild, you need to look no further than the ZTalk Trojan. It's a piece of malware packaged into Android apps, which when downloaded can do a lot of stuff in the background related to the things that I've just mentioned. It can do anything from showing invisible ads, to clicking on ads, to streaming videos invisibly, even sending premium SMS messages so that the spammers or scammers or fraudsters can make money off your phone. It's in the wild and it's evolving. You can read up on it at ZTalk, which is by Kaspersky. They'll give you a whole analysis of how this Trojan works. Okay, so now you're suitably aware of what's happening, and now I'm going to give you an idea of solutions. Although, as I said, a lot of the stuff is impossible or near on difficult to uncover, you need to be smart in the way you do things. And the first thing is, how are you going to detect this? So, part one, if you've been running campaigns for a while, you have a history of data to refer to, and that already tells you a story. And it should reveal what the normal trends look like. You should have a pretty good idea of what the baselines are, and if you see anything that's a deviation from the norm, say something. A common red flag is the large number of installs from a single source. This can be a sub-publisher source, specific IPs, or a specific device user agent. Now you can and should rely on your ad partners to track the data and report, but it's a good idea as well to increase your comfort level, to have a dedicated person in the company to pay attention to your numbers as well. Someone who can take a closer look, better than an automated system, I guess, or at least filtering and measuring, should be able to detect nuances faster and more confidently. Part two is prevention. If you can prevent it in the first place, then you don't have to worry about detecting it. Direct and premium traffic will limit a lot of your exposure to risk. The saying, you get what you pay for, applies. There's several third-party providers that offer proprietary ad fraud security services, such as WideOps and Forensic and Fraud Logic, as well as trusty mobile ad attribution and measurement companies with built-in fraud detection technologies. Don't forget to ask your mobile ad platform provider about their protection and prevention practices so you can get that comfort level. Reputations matter. Find out about your clients, ask around, check for third-party validation where possible. And remember to spend time on your contract. Don't just push it through legal. Take the time to talk about it and ensure that you go through different scenarios with your ad partner so that you can define what you will and will not pay for. And set expectations together so you have a clear path forward. I hope with all of this, I've given you a deeper understanding of the threats we face and how we can minimize these by being smart and working together, sharing and caring. It's everyone's responsibility to help clean things up. And I've taken this as a personal mission and a mission at LeadBolt to go the extra mile by working hand in hand with suppliers and clients alike to ensure we attack fraud at every level and bring real back to mobile. Real people, real traffic, real conversions, and real returns. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions down on the floor. So Germany has obviously very good payout rates. It's a very busy market. And fraudsters are concentrating on areas that they're able to find those gaps in the market to. The US is a very, very well looked at market. So fraudsters go out beyond that and they say, oh, well, if someone is sophisticated in a specific market, I'd rather go where you have people who are not necessarily aware of what's happening so that they can defraud advertisers a bit quicker. Fraud follows the money. It follows the dollars. And Germany is a good market. I think MethBot is a classic example that mobile video fraud can still take place on a very large scale. There are few issues with that. There's things like view-through attribution, which is great, not necessarily fraud, and you have to look at things in context, as I said. If you look at fraud as a whole, again, it's split up into these different areas, and you want to, at the end of the day, find ROI. So I'm very hesitant to say fraud because people say, oh, fraud is evil, it's bad. Fraud is just necessarily a component of quality and how you dissect it. No one wants to go into a space with their eyes shut, and video is still at risk. Again, as I said, there are mechanisms. Okay, so the question is, I mentioned ZTalk and some of the things in the wild. Do I have any predictions of what's coming? I think AI is very exciting and very scary at the same time, because as we're able to mimic human behavior, we're able to actually do things programmatically or automatically where advertisers have a harder time of discerning whether they're getting real engagement. I think what's going to happen is a lot of the tools are going to become more sophisticated, and as those move in parallel, you'll get a lot of the solution providers, a lot of the networks and so on will be trying to combat it. I think there is going to be a lot more. You've seen malware attacks, for example, where they've come and gone. You just have to stay one step ahead. I predict it's going to be a lot more difficult to win the game of mobile advertising if you're an unsophisticated marketer or advertiser. And so everyone needs to lift their game in the ecosystem. So what would I prefer plugin wise to prevent the fraud? Okay, so the question is, what kind of app or plugin would I prefer or suggest for either the detection of fraud and so on? Fraud is a multi-layered approach. I'm going to reserve judgment on which apps are good and which apps are bad, or plugins, but I think it's up to the individual to ensure that they have levels at each part of the process. So fraud, again, is a much wider topic. There's phishing, which is not necessarily fraud, but then it comes down to fraud and it's trying to gain details and so on. So if you're looking to prevent your identity from being taken advantage online or on web, then there are a lot of security tools out there, and certainly you can look them up, all the way through to actual ad fraud, which is then something that's relevant to advertisers specifically, where they're trying to pick up patterns so that they can identify between a real end user and someone who's just trying to make money off them. But I would say there are different layers, and depending on which one you're looking for, you need to assess accordingly. But use a multi-layered approach. Don't just use one. A lot of people say, oh, I installed either an antivirus or an anti-phishing thing or an anti-fraud mechanism on my laptop, computer, or mobile device, and that doesn't replace the weakest link, which is us, the individuals. We're the stupid ones who actually click on things and open things and cause that interaction. So automation doesn't necessarily replace common sense and thinking and being smart and being educated. And you guys are the smart ones because you're here to learn more about it and actually know. So there are different pieces. Click fraud is something that you can identify using patterns and baselines and so on. So you can do that on your own side. There are third-party plugins, which I mentioned, AdLogic's and so on. I think it's just a matter of assessing where they're at. Because the market is moving so quickly, you need to be ahead of the game, and you need to be constantly going around those providers and making sure they're delivering to your expectations. No one has a killer solution that nails it every time. And so sometimes you need a blend, sometimes you need to be in constant contact with them. You've always got to be updating. You've always got to be making sure that you're assessing the market for any newcomers coming out. It's a very exciting industry. I think security is massive, and there's going to be a huge push towards it. You'll see a lot of that AI stuff coming into security as well. All right, I'm happy to take any of the questions on the floor. I'll be down here, so feel free to come and introduce yourselves. And I appreciate you all coming. Thank you very much. You did a great job.